Hi, I'm Lana Miller, and it's good to be with you again. Thanks for taking time to prepare and think with me about the lesson for this week. A New Creation, Session 12. Don't call it dirt. Have you ever heard that said before? We often take for granted the ground we walk on, the land which produces our sustenance, the soil which holds many of the necessities for life. That is, we take them for granted until they're destroyed. At the beginning of this lesson, I was struck by the two stories that Joanne told. One about the children from Chernobyl who spend 4 weeks in other countries in the summer so that they can play outside. And the other about her son not putting soil in his mouth when he was young because of the contaminants from the steel industry and orchards that surrounded them. It made me wonder how many more stories like this we might tell. Do you have a story of soil contamination and its impacts? When my husband and I were working in Southeast Asia with Mennonite Central Committee, we spent time in Dong Nai province with VAVA, the Vietnamese Association of Victims of Agent Orange. Agent Orange was used during the Vietnam War, sprayed over large areas of Vietnam to strip bare the coastal mangroves of the Mekong Delta and the dense canopy forest that could conceal enemy fighters and supply lines. The chemicals used in Agent Orange contained dioxin, a chemical that has seeped silently and invisibly into the soil, carried by the wind and rain. According to an article on the website Yale Environment 360, and there's several websites that talk about the impacts of Agent Orange, I just want to read a little bit to you from this website. Dioxin accumulates steadily as it moves up the food chain. It's in the ponds people fish, the fish they eat, the ducks and chickens they raise in their backyards, and in the breast milk that nourishes their newborn infants. No one will know how many have died from conditions that are now known to be associated with exposure to dioxin, including 9 different kinds of cancer. But the single horror of dioxin is its epigenetic effects causing changes in gene expression that can be transmitted from one generation to the next. The consequences are visible in Vietnam's orphanages and rural villages. Children and adults with grotesque facial deformities, matchstick limbs that splay out in unnatural angles, and swollen and distorted heads that denote hydrocephalus, which is the accumulation of cerebral fluid in the brain. The best guess is that as many as 1 million Vietnamese people have disabilities that may be attributed to Agent Orange. My experience in this village with Vava was perhaps my most profound experience in working in this region. Walking into the homes of children and adults with visible deformities who described in detail the impact of their disease. I wept. To think that humans have treated one another like this and imposed this kind of harm, not just in one generation, but still today. And then to realize that the U.S. government was refusing to provide resources to help in cleaning up the remnants of Agent Orange. This is how I encounter the scripture today, from Joel and Romans. As Joanne notes both of these passages, she says, share a vision of redemption that extends to the earth which itself has suffered devastation and decay because of human sin. And she notes that human salvation depends upon the restoration of the very soil. It's one thing to recognize the devastation we have caused, but the next step is to recognize our responsibility in helping to bring restoration. Joanne does a great job in helping us to understand and put in context both passages from Joel and Romans on pages 70 to 73. And I'd invite you to read these passages together and spend time reflecting on what you notice and what stands out for you as you read her reflections. Let me just note a few things I find helpful. Her comments on Joel when she says God begins with the basics, with the soil and the animals and finally people, in a vision in which all have enough and all will be able to rejoice. So I read back through the passage and I noticed first this call to the soil. Do not fear, O soil. And then next, do not fear, you animals. Both before we get to, O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in God's restoration. We don't often personify soil and animals, giving them human feelings and emotions, using words like do not fear and gladness and rejoicing. So I wonder what it might be like to explore that with your class as well. In the Romans passage, we have similar themes emerging. That Paul sees human domination leading to the futility and decay of creation. And that human redemption is tied to the restoration of all creation. So, what might this mean for us to consider that human abundance, rejoicing, and redemption is dependent on the restoration of the soil, the restoration of all creation? Ugo gives several questions on page 71, and in each of these passages, you may wish to use these questions in your discussion. What is God trying to convey to each of us about God's creation and how we're a part of it? And perhaps, for me, one of the most thought-provoking, how does this passage move you beyond a basic understanding of possession and into a more genuine understanding that we and the land are one? Ugo invites you on page 70 to begin with a walk. I would probably end with one, inviting the class to go outside for 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how much time you have, in a walking prayer. And as you walk, to continue to ask God how you might work at caring for creation. If your mind wanders, come back to this question. God, how do you want me to care for creation? And pay attention to God's responses. As you come back as a group, invite them to share their observations and thoughts. What is God's invitation to care for creation? For the soil. And what are some of the small steps that we have become aware of? Maybe changes in our behavior that might have a larger impact on creation. I would then end by singing For the Beauty of the Earth or reading the words to this song. And I want to close with the last verse from Voices Together. For each perfect gift and sign to this world so freely given, graces human and divine, love uniting earth and heaven. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. Blessings as you prepare this week.